beautiful the march of days as seasons come and go. The hand that shaped the rose hath wrought the crystal of the snow, hath sent the hoary frost of them, of flowing waters sealed, and laid a silent loveliness on hill and wood and field. O white expanses sparkling clear, the radiant moons unfold, the solemn splendors of the night burn brighter through the cold. Life mounts in every throbbing vein, love deepens round the hearth, and clearer sounds the angel hymn, goodwill to all on earth. O thou from whose unfathomed law the year in beauty flows, thyself the vision passing by in crystal and in rose, day unto day doth utter speech, and night to night proclaim, in ever-changing words of light, the wonder of thy name.
The winter solstice is coming, and I'm so excited. Did you know there's an actual exact moment of time that is the winter solstice? And this year it's at 5:02 a.m. Eastern Time on December 21st. And that's the time when the sun is shining directly over the Tropic of Capricorn down in the southern hemisphere. And of course, it's our longest night up in the northern hemisphere, and it's the first day of winter. So I am fascinated by this magical dance of the sun and the seasons, and my family celebrates both of the solstices and both of the equinoxes every year. So for the winter solstice, we build a spiral of evergreen boughs out in our backyard, and we place this candle in the center. And we light the candle after sunset when the world is dark on the longest night of the year to symbolize the little bit of light that is still here on the winter solstice. And then each of us take turns walking into the dark spiral, holding an unlit candle, and we contemplate our year. And when we get to the center, we light our candle from this center candle. And as we walk back, we call in what we would like to call in for the new year, and we place our candle somewhere in the spiral. And then once all of us have walked through, we've created this spiral of light. And it reminds us that it's okay to walk in the darkness, because in the darkness is where we find our rest and rejuvenation. And it reminds us that after the darkness, there is always light. The light will always come back. So people throughout history have been celebrating this time of year in many different ways. Can you imagine what it must have felt like thousands of years ago to watch as the sky was getting darker earlier every night, and the nights were getting longer and colder, and they might have been worried about their survival. So people all over the world have created magnificent structures to honor the sun and to encourage it to come back into the sky. So the Great Pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge in Scotland, Newgrange in Ireland, and Angkor Wat in Cambodia are just a few of the many structures that are erected to perfectly align with the sun on the solstices. And cultures have also been celebrating sun gods and sun goddesses all throughout history. So one of my favorites is Saint Lucia, who wears a crown of candles on her head. And she's celebrated in Scandinavia, where she helps carry people through the darkness. There's also the Egyptian sun god Horus, the Persian god Mithras, the Japanese goddess of the sun Amaterasu, and the Indian queen of heaven Sarasvati. All of these are honored for the light that they bring to their people. And I also want to take a moment to recognize that it is the darkest time of the year. And so it's not only the sun that we honor at this time of year, it's also the dark. So I invite you to sit with that darkness. What would happen if you ate dinner with just candlelight so that you could really see how dark it is outside? And also, I want you to go outside and look up at that night sky. And there's actually a really magical thing that's happening right now where Jupiter and Saturn are looking like, from our perspective, that they're getting closer and closer together. And on the winter solstice, they will be so close that they'll look like one super planet. So go check that out as we get closer to solstice. It's in the dark, slow days of winter that we can cuddle up and be cozy, recharge our energies, and sit with the quiet, listening for the wisdom that wants to come in. That wisdom lives in each of our hearts, but it needs quiet and stillness, attention and intention in order to be heard. It's that quiet voice, that inner knowing that waits inside of us like a seed. And we can water that seed anytime that we sit and listen, and we encourage it to grow stronger and to be braver. It's in these quiet moments of our days and these quiet days of our year that we are able to give that seed the most nourishment. And in turn, that inner voice leads us on our paths of growth and helps us to walk in love. Blessings to you and happy winter solstice.
I light this chalice to remind us of the light of this community, of the love that holds us all, and of our deep interconnectedness. As a child, I was very afraid of the dark. Goblins, monsters, ghouls, all of these possibilities scared me. Living on the West Coast, I must have heard at some point of the volcanic eruption on Mount St. Helens, because I woke up one morning screaming for my mother, convinced that there was even hot lava under my bed coming to get me. Darkness was cause for fear. If I couldn't see what was there, if I couldn't see what was coming, how could I protect myself against it? This is the story that many children, myself included, were raised with. Light is knowing, darkness is unknowing. Light is safety, darkness is fear. In these dark times, there's a reflex to move away from the darkness we see. It will be better after solstice when the light returns, many are saying. Similarly, writ large, many are noting that it will be better after we can be vaccinated and be back together again. All of this guides us intentionally away from the dark and towards the light. And I'm not convinced that that's what we need. I found myself yelling, well, not yelling, but sort of yelling at my car radio the other day, because the commentator had talked about the death toll expected from COVID this winter, the 450,000 that some are naming possible this winter. And instead of sitting in that space, went directly to, but there's a vaccination on the horizon, as though naming that truth in itself was dangerous. As a culture, we're afraid of the dark. And yet the darkness has so much to teach us. There's many creatures who sleep during the day and are only up at night under the cover of darkness to feed. Stars and the moon, harbingers of so much beauty, are only visible in the darkness. The early stages of growth happen in darkness too, in the soil under our feet. And still society relegates darkness to the absence of life rather than an opportunity unto itself. But what would happen if we sat in the dark? What would happen if we sat with that not knowing, that discomfort? How would it change us? And how would our relationship to light change? Anyone who's been through a hard time, and by that I mean all of us, because everyone at some point has been through a hard time, you've experienced this discomfort, and you know what it's like to sit with it. To sit with those questions, like, can I repair this relationship with my parent or with my child or with my spouse or my friend? Or the larger unknowns. Will I survive this? How will our community thrive? Or our world? And it's in those moments that we begin a spiritual journey through the unknown. One of my favorite theologians, Thomas Merton, refers frequently to a Christian concept. He calls it a dark night of the soul. And for years I understood that phrase as a time of hardship, for one to get through and emerge the other side, hopefully not terribly scathed by the journey. But that would be to miss the point. A dark night of the soul, it turns out, is spaciousness and attention. It's the ritual of making room to listen to what our body is telling us. What is it that needs attention? Noticing. Room to be heard. We don't need to fear the dark. Indeed, the dark has much to teach us. I keep naming the hardships in the world, even while many of us are not experiencing them on a personal basis, to guide our attention back to the dark we turn away from. How would our behavior change if we connected to the depth of loss being experienced? What would it mean to be honest with ourselves about the losses inherent in this pandemic? And how would our lives change if we sat in the darkness and listened? Because there is such learning and such freedom that results from that darkness. As a culture, we've pathologized darkness, morphed it into a place of fear, when in fact, entering that darkness, engaging with it, is what sets us free. This solstice, then, that's the invitation, to search not only for the light, but to make friends with the darkness, both inside and outside of ourselves. As Lee offered, spend time in the darkness, both literally and figuratively. Notice what arises. Sit with it. Hear the offering of knowledge if fear shows up, and the places in you that are tender and scared. The darkness will teach us, and the light will return. Both are the immutable ways of the world. May we learn from their rhythm.
I have a story to tell. It's called Celebrating Darkness, and I've adapted it from a story by Erica Barron. Once upon a time, and long ago, there were a people who loved the light. Every day when the sun rose, they would sing songs of celebration for the light. And every day when the sun set, they would sing sad songs, lamenting the passing of the light. And at night, when the sun had set, they would run into their houses and light all their fires and all of their candles to banish the darkness, and they never went outside at night. They were so scared of the dark. Now in this land, there were born two remarkable children. They were twins, and one of them seemed to carry a glowing light inside of her, and her parents called her Solina. Everywhere she went, anytime she entered a room, it seemed to get a little bit brighter. Now her sister seemed to carry a still, quiet darkness inside of her, and her parents called her Luna. Every time she entered a room, it seemed to get a little more dim and a little more quiet. Now, as they grew, it became clear that these children were, in fact, magical children. And before you dismiss their magic, I just want to remind you that every child is a magical child. So Solina had the gift of healing and encouraging new growth. Anytime a friend would fall down and get hurt, she would sit by them and hold their hand until they felt better. She would spend hours in the garden celebrating the new growth of the plants and encouraging the flowers, the blossoms, and the fruits. She could cheer up anyone who was having a hard day. Now, Luna, on the other hand, she had the power to bring calm and peace wherever she went. So in her family, it was her, even as a young child, who would help them fall asleep at night when they were having a hard time sleeping. She could calm animals and bring them to stillness when they were frightened. She could soothe and calm anyone who was having a hard day. Now, as time passed, the people's love of the light and fear of the darkness only grew, until one day they thought that they would ask Solina to use her powers of healing and brightness and new growth to ask the sun to stand still in the sky. And Solina said, I can't do that. But they asked her every day for months and months to just try. And so one day she climbed to the top of the highest hill in the land. She threw up her hands to the sky and said, Sun, please stand still. And you know what? It did. The sun stopped moving in the sky and just shone brightly from its highest point. And the people rejoiced. They sang all of their songs of celebration for the light. They had parties and celebrations for days on end, so happy and grateful that they never had to be in the darkness again. But then, you know what happened? They got very tired. And when they tried to sleep, they tossed and turned. It was too bright and the sun shone in their windows, and they started to feel exhausted. After a month of not sleeping well, they realized they had no time for rest. There was no quiet stillness of the night, and they realized that they had made a mistake. Even though they loved the light, they yearned for rest. So they asked Solina to please go back and ask the sun to move again in the sky. So she climbed to the top of the highest hill. She threw her arms up in the air and said, Sun, please move again. But nothing happened. So she tried it a second time, and nothing happened. She tried a third time, and the sun still stayed high and shining in the sky. Now the people started to panic. What if they could never sleep again? But then a quiet voice stepped forward and said, Let me try. It was Luna. So Luna took her sister's place on the top of the hill. She threw her arms up in the sky and said, Please, sun, set. We need the darkness. And you know what? It worked. Immediately the sun started to set, and it set so fast that within 10 minutes, it was dark, full night. And the people were terrified. They had never been outside at night before. They had no candles with them. They had lit no fires. And they ran around on the top of that hill, bumping into each other, frantically trying to get home. And suddenly someone said, Look up at the sky. And they all looked up, and for the first time in their whole lives, they saw the light of 1,000,000 shining stars. And they stood and stared in wonder. And then as they looked around, they realized that their eyes were starting to adjust to the night. And they started to see familiar pieces of the landscape, and they realized that they could navigate their way home by the light of the stars. So slowly, with reverence and awe, they walked home. And that night the people rested. They were so grateful for a full night's sleep. They woke in the morning and they sang their songs of celebration for the sun. But in the night, as the sun set, they didn't want to sing their sad songs. So musicians started singing a new song, a song of gratitude for the night, and the people joined in. It became their new sunset song. So as time passed and the twins grew, they continued to be beloved by all the people. The people realized that they needed the gifts of stillness and quiet and darkness as much as they needed the gifts of cheerful, vibrant new life and new energy and new growth. And they realized that it's in the darkness that they can listen to their inner voices and hear their inner wisdom. And that if they listen carefully and closely, they can guide their lives and their paths by the light of the stars.
I spoke to Lee of a Christian tradition, the Advent wreath, and how a colleague turned it around, honoring the darkness rather than the light. And it's like the solstice spiral, she reminded me, offering a path through both parts of our experience. So traditionally, the Advent wreath is used to mark the Sundays until Christmas, with gradually increasing light. Each week, a new flame is lit to represent light banishing darkness. This year, we're trying something a little bit different. Darkness is as important as light. The cold dark of winter is as important to life as is the bright warmth of summer. We need the blessing of the dark as much as the blessing of the light. What's more, as a community committed to anti-racism, we recognize the subtle danger of always equating white or light with good and black or dark with bad. To claim the blessings of the dark is an act of justice as well. So this year we begin with all of the lights, and we will extinguish one flame after another until we enter into the full darkness. So this first candle honors the gift of rest and healing. To truly rest, we need dark. In the darkness of sleep, our bodies and our brains heal. In times of high anxiety, in days of stress and worry, we give thanks for the healing power of darkness. May we be blessed by the gift of rest. The second candle represents joy. We honor the beauty and joy of those things which we can only find in the nighttime. The fireflies, the owls, the crickets, the stars. We give thanks for the beauty and joy to be found only in the dark. May we be blessed by this gift of darkness. The third candle reminds us of those things that exist in the dark, far, far away from us. The creatures in the depths of the ocean, creatures in the darkest caves. We imagine the life that may exist in the deepest, darkest parts of the universe, on remote asteroids or planets where we could not survive. Just because humans cannot or do not live there, that doesn't mean that the spirit of life is not at work abundantly. We are not all there is. Nature is not just for us. So may this make us humble. May we be blessed by this awesome, abundant life of the darkness. Lastly, but definitely not least, we give thanks for the darkness of not knowing. There is so much we can never understand. There are so many questions that we're afraid to ask. Let us not be afraid of the blackness of mystery, the beautiful black of the universe that births the stars, the darkness of the womb as life prepares to be born, the dark winter that must exist for there to be a spring. May we be blessed by the blackness of the not knowing. We have honored the darkness of not knowing, the blackness of mystery. We have remembered that even in the dark places no human can live in, the deepest oceans, the furthest unknown planet, life thrives. We have been humbled by the fullness of the dark. We have celebrated the beauty of the nighttime, the lights of the fireflies, and the brilliance of the stars against the black sky. And we have rested, knowing that we must have darkness and rest to heal. The darkness that we now find ourselves in, is this the darkness of the womb, the cold chill of night in a manger? Is this the black sky where, if we pay attention, a new star appears, moving us in strange ways, leading us to mystery? What is to be born and what is to be held by this holy darkness?
Please join me in this solstice body prayer. The words are, may the solstice slow us down, give us rest, and help us grow. And we'll say that 2 times with motions, and then do the motions 2 times in silence. May the solstice slow us down, give us rest, and help us grow. May the solstice slow us down, give us rest, and help us grow.
Life is the greatest gift of all the riches on this earth. Life and its creatures, great and small, of high and lowly birth. So treasure it and measure it with deeds of shining worth. Mind is the brightest gift of all, its thoughts no barrier mars. It seeks creation's hidden plan, its quest surmounts all Mars. It rains the wind, it chains the storm, it weighs the outmost stars. We are of life, each shining gift, the measure of all things. Up from the dust our temples lift, our vision soars on wings. For seed and root, for flower and fruit, our grateful spirit sings.